At COP28, parties agreed to transition away from fossil fuels and triple the renewable energy capacity of the world by 2030. The challenge now back home is turning rhetoric into action. Hello and welcome, I'm Iya Gozum and you're watching Rappler Talk. With us today is Eric Francia, President and CEO of ACEN Corporation, the listed energy platform of the Ayala Group. Hello Eric, welcome to Rappler Talk.
Hi, good to be here.
So let's start with the bigger picture. Why is shifting to renewables good for business?
Well, of course, we decided to make this strategic pivot from thermal to renewables about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, at about 2016, 2017. Historically, the energy platform of Ayala, which we started from a standing start in 2011, while we had aspirations of being a sustainable energy platform, we quickly realized 12 years ago that renewables would be hard to scale up at a time in a reliable and affordable manner. So we had practically no choice but to go into coal, the early part of last decade. But we realized in 2016, 2017 that the world was shifting, that the future of sustainability underpinned by renewables growth is real. And we felt the groundswell among all the ESG movements, including financial institutions, investors, and so forth, that ESG investing, sustainable investing, is becoming mainstream. And renewables were getting more competitive, technology was advancing, price was dropping, and it was only a matter of time that renewables was going to be at parity with thermal.
Right.
So while it was still early at the time, Ayala being always at the forefront of sustainability, we made that hard choice to shift away from thermal, started divesting our thermal assets, and generating value, cash, and investing all of it in renewables. It does take time to develop renewables. It's just like real estate. A lot of it has to do with picking the best locations, locations that are appropriate, where there's a good renewable resource, whether it's solar or wind, locations that are reasonably priced, locations that are in good distance to the transmission network as well. No? So you need to do all that, and it takes time. So it's good that we did that shift early on, so that now we are in the midst of the energy transition, a lot of dynamic changes, uncertainties, and so forth, especially exacerbated by the energy crisis last year. So it really emphasizes the importance of having that energy security and not relying too much on fossil fuel imports, and not being subjected to volatility and uncertainty of pricing and so forth. So there's a strong, compelling case for renewables. Of course, the holy grail is to unlock the potential of renewables. You need to scale up energy storage. So that's a long topic altogether. But I think whenever we talk about scaling up and depending on renewables, we cannot divorce the conversation on incorporating energy storage to make sure that what we're putting to the transmission line is not only clean, but also reliable.
Okay, you've spoken at the COP28 main stage about divesting from SL Tech. Can you talk about that?
Yes, as part of our transition, this journey that we've gone through from thermal to renewables, at first we were thinking of this simplistically, which entailed the simple divestment of coal plants and reinvesting the proceeds to scale up renewables. A lot of our investors hailed that move, encouraged us to do that. But some of our ESG investors, the more astute ones and the stricter ones, for lack of a better term, called us out and said, you know, when you divest a thermal plant, a coal plant, for example, aren't you passing the problem to somebody else, the problem of emissions?
That's a good question.
It is. and it gave us a pause, a long pause, and say, okay, there's a point, but what do you want us to do? If we divest it simplistically, that is not, arguably, that is not the most responsible thing we can do, because they're right. We are just prolonging the emissions and putting it out of our control. If we keep it in our portfolio, a lot of these ESG investors will not invest in ACEN. And how can we grow our renewable platform? And if we shut it down overnight, that's irresponsible and a non-starter either, because number one, the country needs it. We're already in a very tight supply situation in the Philippines. And number two, that's destroying shareholder value because there is still quite a bit of economic value embedded in those coal plants. So it really gave us this dilemma until a couple of years ago when the Asian Development Bank was promoting this concept of energy transition mechanism, whose thesis is that there is a pool of low-cost, purpose-driven investors, be it debt or equity investors, who are willing to put in capital to take out coal plants with the purpose of retiring them earlier than their normal technical life. So it was like an aha moment for us, which is, it's a very interesting idea where we don't only get to divest the coal plant and get the proceeds and invest that into renewables, but there is an element of an early coal retirement, a commitment to retire and transition the coal plant earlier than its normal operating life. So we are ending up doing the right thing. So we moved quickly on this idea. We thought that rather than wait for the international market to take shape, we thought that that project was had a modest enough size. It was only $350 million, or about 17.5 billion pesos. We thought that this could be funded purely onshore or locally. And we tested this with some of our relationship institutions like RCBC and BPI, and they supported the idea. Ironically, RCBC and BPI are the first two banks in the Philippines to have restrictions or limitations in terms of lending to coal. They said no more lending to new coal plants, and they're going to have a sunset date for existing coal plants. And they agreed, they saw the wisdom behind the energy transition mechanism, so they supported that. On the equity side, this was anchored by major insurance companies like GSIS and Insular Life. So it was a great transaction. It was the world's first market-based energy transition mechanism. We reached the financial close last November 2022. So the divestment also entailed the commitment to retire the coal plant by 2040. That is after 25 years of operating life, because SLTech started its commercial operations in 2015 for Unit 1 and 2016 for Unit 2. So we're saying, by 2040 or so, we will ensure that the coal plant is transitioned. Now, having said that, we decided to give ourselves some room to possibly increase that ambition or accelerate the timeline.
Fast track.
Yes, the option to fast track, exactly. So we have a call option, ACEN, while we sold the plant, right, to address the requirements of our ESG investors. We thought that first we have to ensure that it gets retired by 2040, but we also gave, as I said, the possibility for us to accelerate that if the right mechanism emerged, right, so that we can potentially advance the retirement by 10 years. And why 10 years? Why 2030? The International Energy Agency, when they quantify based on science, if we are to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius versus pre-industrial levels, according to IEA, the world needs to reduce coal emissions by 55% between 2022 and 2030. And coal emissions...
Is a tall order.
It is a tall order.
That's
yes.
a short period of time.
Absolutely. Imagine shutting down more than half of our coal fleet within 7 years. It's almost unthinkable right now. For developed markets like the US or Australia, it is believable. That's the good news, because a lot of their coal plants are reaching 40 to 50 years old, which is the end of the technical life anyway. But in the case of Southeast Asia, our coal plants, Southeast Asia has the fourth largest installation of coal plants globally, number one. And number two, our average age of coal plants here in Southeast Asia is less than 15 years old. So
very young.
how do you expect, with growing economies and so forth, how do you really expect us to shut down the plants within the decade? But we thought it shouldn't be an excuse for us to do nothing, right? And just expect the developed countries or the so-called global north to do all the heavy lifting,
Right.
and take what I would say is somewhat a prevalent thinking that we're the victims, why should we be the ones to make these hard decisions?
And that's the narrative that's a huge narrative in the COP, right?
Correct. Now, I think we need to take this into perspective, because that's sort of a glass half empty argument. The glass half full argument is, yes, in a way it's true, but hopefully the conclusion doesn't lead us to the conclusion of do nothing and let others do all the heavy lifting. But rather we should say, look, we need help from the global north, from the more developed markets where there's more economic prosperity and so forth. If we can rechannel some of that funding to the global south or to the emerging markets, that will help us with our decarbonization journey, I think that's a great thing. So I think I'm more towards the latter thinking, which is, okay, we recognize we don't have the resources, but our neighbors from the developed markets can help us with that. And that's essentially what's underpinning this opportunity, and that's the reason why we gave ourselves that flexibility. I believe, and again, as evidence with the recent COP event, which I thought had a lot of promise and traction, I believe that mechanism that will help us accelerate and increase our ambition and accelerate the coal retirement and transition is upon us. And that's the notion of transition credits, or high integrity carbon credits, that have to do with the early retirement of coal plants and the replacement of the lost generation with clean, reliable, and affordable energy.
What are the rewards and the sacrifices that you see as a pioneer in divesting from coal, in investing more in more renewable sources of energy in the Philippines?
Well, it's being a pioneer in scaling up renewables, and being a pioneer in terms of the early retirement of coal plants is you need to be very resolute in terms of your purpose. You need to think out of the box, because there's a lot of barriers.
You're right.
There's a reason why the initiatives of the Just Energy Transition, the JETP programs, which is supposed to be a more scalable version of what we did, there's a lot of issues. We found that out when we did our own transaction. It's not easy. That is one of the bigger insights. Sort of falls under the category, tell me something I don't know, right? But it is. There's a lot of nuances, complexities, barriers, and so forth, that one needs to be not only resolute and creative, but also be very astute in terms of risk allocation as well. And it's never easy to address the different requirements of multiple parties. Somebody really needs to be willing to make things happen. And in our case, we're fortunate that our ultimate parent, the Ayala Corporation, is quite resolute in terms of championing sustainability. So it was a key enabler to the risk allocation and enabling this mechanism. Of course, the other stakeholders the debt and equity investors of the ETM were also extremely helpful. So it's a whole of system approach. We had to engage the power plant workers as well to be supportive of this, that they are part of the journey. We're now engaging with the community as well. So I think it's a whole of system approach, which is not easy. So it's not a surprise that it's going to take time before these things take off. But when they do, I think this can catch on pretty quickly in terms of the replicability and the scaling up. But it's very difficult to be pioneering along these lines because you are encountering the difficulties, challenges, and so forth.
And you're actually building the blueprint for other companies as well.
Exactly. So in the recently concluded COP, that's what we've done, our lessons learned from our market-based ETM. We've been doing this for the past 12 months, by the way. We've had teach-in sessions, be it with individual organizations. A lot, we must have spoken to dozens of organizations, both individual organizations as well as associations, including GFANs, for example, because they're very interested to see how exactly we structured it, how did we implement, what are the challenges, lessons learned, and so forth. And that's part of our mission, which is to share this so that this becomes scalable. We're doing a sort of a part two, another exciting mechanism, which is the transition credits, which is different, right? ETM, different but related. It's the same purpose, which is to accelerate that transition from fossil fuel to renewables. ETM is really sourcing blended finance, low-cost financing to encourage the early retirement of coal plants. Transition credits, on the other hand, is another mechanism. So it entails the creation of this instrument called carbon credits in exchange for the asset owner to retire the coal plant early and replace that in a just manner. Replace that with clean, reliable, affordable energy and carrying out a just transition, making sure that no one gets left behind, taking care of the community and the affected workers. And that's what we're piloting now. So at COP28, we announced our collaboration, our partnership with MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation-backed 3CI, or Coal to Clean Credit Initiative. And what we've agreed to is basically we will do the world's first pilot project on transition credits, because the 3CI, alongside with Vera, which is the global registry and standard setter, they will be writing the rules in terms of the principles, parameters, and guidelines to ensure high integrity when it comes to early coal retirement and replacement with clean energy in a just transition manner. So they need a real world example as they write the rules to make sure that it's very not only principled but also pragmatic. So the MAS basically picked two pilot projects. One is ACEN's SLTech plant, given that we have the right to reacquire SLTech. And they also partnered with the ADB, who's doing a similar plant here in the Philippines together with the Philippine government. So it's great that the Philippines is at the forefront of transition credits.
Kind of like a lab rat.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's going to be very busy and exciting next 12 months, and we're certainly hopeful that in the next few months we're rooting for the designers of this methodology to complete the methodology for transition credits. And hopefully we will get certified as well, so that we can start going to market basically and getting those support from the carbon credit buyers and really create a market. And this is something that hopefully will be replicable and scalable across the sector. This is a potential game changer and will really drive the acceleration of this transition.
Right. So let's go down to some specifics. What's the current market share of ACEN in the renewable energy space in the country, and what's your target number in the near future?
So renewables, so first of all, let's start from the big picture. From the Philippines, Philippines is about 25 gigawatts or 25,000 megawatts of installed capacity. And the total output of all of that capacity is a little over 100 billion kilowatt hours or 110 billion kilowatt hours of output. That's the total market today. Of that output, renewables share is only about 22%.
22%, right.
Right? So that's around 25 billion kilowatt hours, let's say, give or take, of the market, right? Now, solar and wind, which are the fastest growing subcomponents of renewables, because you have to remember that bulk of our renewable capacity, that 22% or the 25 billion kilowatt hours, is primarily driven by two renewable technologies. That's geothermal and hydroelectric power plants, both of which have high outputs, right? Geothermal is base load. It generates more than 90% output at any given time during the year. Hydro is also pretty high, more than 50% typically, right? So today it drives most of the output of renewables. Solar and wind are relatively new. They account for less than 5% of that output.
Yeah.
Right, so it's very small. So it's less than 5% of that 22%, right? Of that small sub 5%, right? Solar and wind combined, I think, is just about 2 gigawatts of installed capacity. We do have a significant share there. Combined, when you talk about operating and under construction, it should be somewhere in the 40 to 50% share today. No, but the competitors, the whole of the sector are ramping up. We were just early movers, right? So I'm not sure that it's a good thing for our share to go down over time, because that means it's a growing market, right? Despite the fact that we will grow, I don't think that's a sustainable.
So that's a development that you're going to welcome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would be shocked if we had a 50% share of solar and wind in a in a market that will triple.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah, that will triple over the next 7 years, right? So yeah, this would be a welcome development. So that is our niche, our focus, right? We're focused on solar and wind, but we need to incorporate energy storage, because while we love solar and wind, right, it has its limitations. Because they're variable or intermittent, that poses two issues with respect to the grid. And as we all know, grid is one of the top constraints in any market, not only in the Philippines, but virtually in all markets.
That's their problem.
Yeah, the limitation of the grid, because we're going through a transformation. The transition, the energy transition, is a massive structural transformation. Imagine changing. It's like telco, right? It's like changing all of those landlines. It's building on top. It's like a new system, right? So no different than we're trying to put the new technologies with an old infrastructure. It's never easy, right? So, and it's even more challenging if you put variable or intermittent, because number one, just take a solar plant. A solar plant's output, or what we call capacity factor, is less than 20% for the whole year. So when you talk about a 100 megawatt solar plant, it doesn't produce 100 megawatts, 8,760 hours per year. You have to multiply that by around 15 to 20%. And that's how much they produce out of the year. Unlike a gas plant or a geothermal plant, which is very reliable and base load, they will produce 80, 90% of the number of hours times the rated capacity. That's not the case for solar or wind, for that matter. So, which means to say that that is a very low or inefficient use of the grid, right? I have this analogy just to laymanize this. The grid is like a road network, right? We have high voltage lines, 500 kV, 230 kV. That's the equivalent of your South Luzon, North Luzon Expressway, right? And then you've got your the other lines that connect to the high voltage line. These are your 115 kV lines or 69 kV lines. These are the equivalents of your Jupiter Avenue or your side street or etc. Right? Imagine if you have cars, vehicles that are only powered by solar and no battery, no storage. Guess what will happen? During solar hours, how do you think EDSA, NLEX, SLEX, Jupiter Street, etc. will look like? It will be full of cars, right? It will be clogged during solar hours because that's the only time that your cars can go out, the purely solar powered cars without energy storage, right? It's the same thing with the grid. You're congesting the grid and at night, hardly anyone will be out because you have a lot of solar powered cars. So we need to be careful in terms of injecting too much renewables or variable renewables, e.g. Solar.
But still, even with these trade-offs, you acknowledge these trade-offs, you still invest in solar farms.
Yes.
You still believe it's good business sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely, up to a certain extent, right? But if you invest too much, and we've seen this in other countries, if you have excess of solar, for example, you start affecting the other plants. Like in Australia, what we see is there's so much solar penetration. There's solar rooftops as well because the households there are incentivized to put solar on their rooftops. There's what you call a duck curve, right? Where there's so much solar production during the day. And what happens is those coal plants, those thermal plants will have to ramp down, right? And then the prices will drop significantly during the day. That's not very healthy to the system for two reasons. One is prices become very volatile, right? No one likes volatility except for traders, etc. Consumers hate that, businesses hate volatility. The second reason is you will start damaging or affecting your thermal plants, which you still need in your system, because coal plants don't want to be cycled up and down because of thermal stress. They have to be relatively stable. So while we are in a transition, these plants, fossil fuel plants, are still needed in the interim, and we should take care of them because if they conk out prematurely, there will be problems. No?
Right.
So I think there will come a time, and I think we're already at that time, when we need to start to be proactive and incorporate energy storage, right, alongside with the rollout or the scale-up of variable renewables like solar and wind. So we are very strong proponents of integrating energy storage, particularly battery storage, in a renewable energy plant like a solar plant.
Right. What's the argument in switching completely to renewables rather than also going through transition fuels? Of course, without compromising energy security. Because I think at COP28, parang they recognize the role of transition fuels, but a lot of advocates and CSOs are saying that that's just a waste of time and resources. We should switch completely to renewables.
I think it's easier said than done. I think there's a rhetoric out there that renewables is cheaper than fossil fuel. And I think we need to clarify that statement because it can be subject to misconception, right? That's comparing apples and oranges. It's true that when the sun is shining, solar produces power. It is cheaper than coal or gas. That is a true statement. But if the sun is not shining, there's nothing to compare. So would you want as a customer to be subjected to be only supplied by solar? It's cheaper, but during the day you have power and at night you have no power. It's an unfair comparison. right? Because gas and coal is reliable. When you need it, it's there. Solar without storage, when you need it at night, it's not there. So how can you compare an apple to an orange, right? When it's there, it's cheaper. If it's not there, sorry ka na lang, right? You buy from somebody else. Hindi naman pwedeng ganon. So I think the more fair comparison is make it reliable power, dispatchable power versus dispatchable power. Once you do that, then you have to incorporate energy storage in your solar plants, as an example. Either that or you buy from peaker plants. So at night, right, you purchase from gas or diesel or spot market or what have you. Then you start comparing, right? So in our case, we've been doing that. We've been building solar plants, but complementing the gap, right, by buying from the market. We have no choice because if we want to stay competitive and serve our customers, right, we need to do that, right? We buy from SL Tech, for example, because we need to complement our renewables with other technologies. Otherwise, we cannot tell customers you're on your own when the sun is not shining. If we incorporate battery storage, at least in the past, we will be uncompetitive. So one can argue it is more expensive in the past, no? Before the energy crisis, because battery storage was still on the high side and gas was still on the lower side, the equation did not clear. Solar and storage is more expensive than gas or fossil fuel on an apples-to-apples comparison. Today, that equation has shifted. Okay, gas today is on the expensive side. Okay, so Midmerit gas, when I say Midmerit, it's like not base load, so Midmerit is like supplying 12 hours during the day, during the peak periods. No? If you buy from gas, and mind you, Malampaya, which is our cheapest form of gas in the Philippines, is declining. We all know that. And increasingly, unless we develop our own indigenous gas here in the Philippines, we'll be increasingly dependent on imported gas, which is LNG. It's not cheap, especially in the post-energy crisis situation. So just take one, Ilihan gas plant is now supplying to Meralco from using LNG. You look at their price, the implied price of fuel for gas is about more than 6 pesos per kilowatt hour. If you add the non-fuel cost, for Midmerit or a 12-hour usage, you would add potentially around 3 pesos per kilowatt hour. You'll get to $9, 9 pesos per kilowatt hour. That's Midmerit gas. At that price point, I believe that solar and storage, the integrated, what we call IRES, the Integrated Renewables and Energy Storage System, can already compete at that price. The question is, are we willing as consumers and our regulator, are we willing to lock in, that kind of price, 9 pesos, which, mind you, is the de facto price of Midmerit gas today or in the last 6-12 months for the next 20 years, right? That's the question. To me, in fact, it's a no-regret move. I'm not saying that we should forget about gas and go all in on solar and storage, because there's still a thinking that, where will gas prices go 5, 10, 15 years from now? No one will be able to tell us, right? It can go down and can also go up, right? So to me, we need to have a portfolio. We need to diversify and hedge. To me, given that the price of gas in the last 6 to 12 months is already comparable to the price of an IRES, to me, that's a no-regret move to lock in IRES, even at those 9 peso rates and so forth. The more competitive we can get, the better, right? And to me, just to link this to what we're trying to do with the transition credits, because I do acknowledge that there is still an inertia and some resistance to locking in price levels that we've never seen before. This is the first time we're seeing a sustained, we're used to the 4, 5, 6 peso level for generation charge. not the 8, 9, or 10
Right.
pesos, right? So there's still hope that this could go down closer to historical norms. Never mind the fact that there is inherent inflation, and that's an inevitable reality, right? But we need to try our best to do what's best for the consumer, and we are one with our policymakers to really ensure that we're doing everything we can. And I think if I go back to the transition credits, that's what we're seeing as the potential
Right.
opportunity to address the challenges that we're facing. So to summarize, we believe that the transition credits, and it's a great example if we can pull this off, the transition credits will pay for three things. Now, number one, it should pay for the replacement cash flows and the write-offs that we will be facing because we are retiring or shutting down a coal plant that is perfectly operating well and is needed by the system. If we did that by 2030, we need to compensate the asset owner for that. That's source of funds, use of funds, number one, for the transition credits. Number two, if and when we retire a coal plant prematurely or ahead of their schedule, in our case 2040, we advance that by 10 years, we need to do the responsible thing. We will be depriving the grid with 1.8 billion kilowatt hours. 1.8 billion is almost 2%, just under 2% of the system. That's significant in a very tight system. We need to be able to replace that with new capacity that is clean, that's reliable, i.e. not cost the grids any problems, right? And is affordable, right? I cannot just say, oh, it's going to be 9 pesos and customers suck it up. We need to bring that down closer to Meralco average, for example. Right now, generation charge is somewhere between 6.50 to 7 pesos. We don't want to be pulling that up. We want to be as close as possible to that. And whatever gap that is, to that affordability gap, if you will, should be funded, ideally should be funded by the transition credits. And then number three, we need to do this transition in a just manner. We need to take care of the communities, the workers, and we need to decommission the plant in a responsible manner. That will entail a cost as well. So these three things will be paid for essentially by the transition credits. The good news is that we believe that the equation will clear because when we look at carbon tax in Singapore, it's going to increase to 50 to 80 Sing dollars per ton, which is around 36 to 60 US dollars per ton. In Europe, carbon price is hovering around 80 euros. It reached a high, I believe, of 100 euros per ton. So I think at those levels, there's enough room to fund these three things that I mentioned. If there's savings that we can provide to the carbon taxpayers or the carbon emitters and so forth, so much better. It becomes a truly win-win situation.
Do you have any estimates of ACEN spending in the next 5-10 years?
Well, yes, we're currently now very close to the 5 gigawatts of renewables. We're officially at 4.5 gigawatts, but we have projects that are almost secured, and 5 gigawatts is visible. So against that 5 gigawatt pro forma capacity, we have a balance sheet with about $5 billion worth of assets. We communicated our new aspiration, which is ACEN 2030, our goal to reach 20 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. So that is quadrupling, growing our renewable portfolio almost by 4x versus where we are today. So it's more ambitious than the 3x goal of COP28. In fact, last year when we announced our 2030 vision, it entailed a 6x growth versus our 3.4 gigawatt of installed capacity last year. So we're moving along and expanding. So from 5 to 20, that's a 15 gigawatt gap that we're going to close over the balance of the decade. The rough estimation is per megawatt, you require about $1 million per megawatt. It's a little less for solar, a little bit more for wind, but let's just call it 1 million. So that's about $15 billion more or less that we would be needing in terms of new capital for the balance of the decade. But there's a lot of appetite from investors, both equity and debt investors, to be funding sustainable projects, because a lot of them cannot support coal, or even some of them not even gas anymore.
Right.
And there's no way to go but to support renewables. And given that we have among the largest renewable pipeline and platform in the region, we're getting a lot of support. So we think that balance sheet is not going to be, funding is not going to be a major issue. I think the challenging thing is to get the people, because a lot of this will entail a lot of heavy lifting and work. We have a growing organization, but
Right.
to attract, retain, motivate, develop people from within, while we have a preeminent position, there's always challenges, of course, in a growing organization to do all of these things. But we're on the right track, and I believe that we're in a good position to realize those aspirations.
Okay. At COP28, the final text said, and the parties agreed to transition away from fossil fuels instead of what other vulnerable countries are pushing, na gamitin yung term na phasing out. What do you think about that? Kasi I think earlier you said it's just a matter of semantics, but I think for other countries it's a matter of life and death.
Correct. I do emphasize the ones who are most vulnerable, and I do understand that their strong position. I would if I were in their shoes, right? I would like a commitment from the entire world in the strongest possible terms, right? And back it with action, right? So first of all, I would say that I do empathize with that position. However, I think we also need to recognize that this is the first time that fossil fuels was incorporated in such landmark policy that everyone agrees to. And it's a big win, right? We should celebrate the win. I think whether you call it transition or phase down or phase out, I think at the end of the day, we all mean the same thing in terms of the end outcome. It's a matter of how do we get there and how fast, right? And I think this is one of those things where the devil is in the details. And I think the glass half full, or the silver lining here, is at least there is already broad agreement that we should, a lot of the battle on climate change is a battle that we should be winning on the fossil fuel front. And that's I think the watershed moment in COP28. And now that you have very specific, tangible initiatives, such as the transition credits, such as the ETM, et cetera, I think it's incumbent on us, working with the whole of the system, whole of society, our partnerships with institutions like the MAS. We should just make sure that we keep the wheels in motion, and we convert thought and talk to action. And that's what we're here to do. So we're hoping to be catalysts of change and action, and we're here to set out things to get things done, things that are replicable and scalable, and really affect the accelerated transition from fossil fuel to clean energy.
Okay, so the Philippine government had set the target of making renewables make up 35% of the energy mix by 2030, and then 50% by 2040.
Yes.
Right. So do you think that that's achievable? Are the policies in place enough to attract investors, to attract local corporations to make the actions that you're doing now?
Yes, a big picture, I think, again, I always say this, and I laud our government leaders, especially the DOE, for setting the right aspiration, for not only aspiration, but also backing it with policy, right, and the framework. to allow us to thrive and help enable those aspirations. So I think that the goal of 35% and certainly the 50% by 2040 is attainable. It's not going to be easy, right? By our estimation, given that the country is growing, the electricity demand is growing 5 to 6% per annum, you need to incorporate that into the equation. We're growing also from 22% renewable share to 35%. And a lot of the new renewable capacity, at least our belief, is going to be driven by variable renewables like solar and wind. We believe that there will be growth also from geothermal, hydro, and biomass. But let's face it, it's not going to close the gap. It will be in support of, but we need a lot of scale up on solar and wind. And therefore, you need to incorporate a lot of battery storage as well. If you do the math, given the low capacity factors of solar and wind, which will, as I believe, will drive a lot of that renewable growth, we will require somewhere between 18 to 20 gigawatts of new renewable capacity to be operating by 2030. Okay, that is basically more than tripling the installed renewable base today, which is around 7 gigawatts. Today, you add 18 gigawatts, so you need to see the 7 grow to about 25 gigawatts by 2030. So that's in line with the COP28 goal of tripling. This is more than tripling. Because a lot of the capacity will come from lower capacity factors like solar and wind. We believe it can be done. Again, I think we need to incorporate energy storage because I can imagine that a lot of that capacity will come from solar, but we cannot afford to have 12 or 14,000 megawatts of solar during the day in 2030 and cause all the coal plants to ramp down. You're going to stress a lot of the coal plants physically and stress the owners, the asset owners of the coal plants. So I think we need to capture a lot of that solar production or wind over excess production through storage and then release them during the non-solar hours, for example. It also helps mitigate the constraint that we're all facing, which is the transmission or the grid. So I think it's very critical to get energy storage into the equation. And the good news is following the reversal of the price decline of energy storage, it did increase during the height of the Ukraine crisis because of the increase in commodity costs and so forth. It has come back to pre-Ukraine crisis levels and is expected to get back to the all-time lows and continued double-digit decline in the next few years. So I think the next 2, 3, 4 years will be critical in terms of incorporating energy storage into the system. So that's a key enabler, and of course, upgrading, augmenting our transmission system as well. But the projects are there. In the case of ACEN, we currently have close to 2,000 megawatts of renewables, mostly solar and wind, either in operations or under construction. And a lot of our projects will become operational in the next within 2024. But we will be adding part of our 20 gigawatt plan is we estimate that 40% of our capacity will be coming from the Philippines. Philippines will remain as our largest and core market with about 40% of our portfolio. So in line with this, we expect the 2,000 megawatts or so to grow to close to 8,000 megawatts of renewables in the Philippines. So as I mentioned earlier, we will have a substantial portion of the growth that's expected. That 18 gigawatt growth, we will take care of probably a third or more of that growth. Depends really how the rest of the industry will react. No? Right. But I think it's doable. We're not the only game in town. DOE also recently allowed 100% foreign investments. That will certainly help the other players are stepping up to the plate as well in terms of the renewable rollout. So I think the ball is rolling, and everyone is supportive of the policy of the DOE. And again, I think we've got a pretty optimistic picture. We also, by the way, were in a recent survey under the BNEF, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They put Philippines as the fourth most attractive renewable market globally among all global emerging markets. That's something to be proud of, and I think we're in the right market, we're in the right space. And again, kudos to our policymakers for creating this environment, and it's up to the private sector, given that we're a liberalized market. It's incumbent on us to really help and make this renewable transition happen.
Right. Thanks, Eric, for sharing your insights. We've been speaking with ACEN President and CEO Eric Francia on the challenges of making headway of the renewable industry in the Philippines. Again, I'm Iya Gozum. Thanks for watching.